Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, where we talk bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. This is part 2 of episode 55, which is all about Savage Worlds. It features additional bits and pieces that didn't quite fit in the first part. It's not a supplement, it's more like an extra deck of cards that you didn't realise you needed until you got it. Blythe, our resident rules lawyer, has often said, and he says it again later, that Savage World really comes alive once you have a setting. Without a clear idea of where you'll be adventuring, it's harder to piece together all the different rules and subsystems that come with the game. In this part of the episode, we explored some of the settings that we've played in, highlighting the features and what we like about them, from Deadlands to Slipstream and beyond. Savage Worlds has a lot to offer RPGs focused on action-adventure. We also have a couple of guests to help us. First, Christian Nommay from Knight Errant Media, who has developed Titan Effect, which has just been released in a Declassified edition so that it's compatible with the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition and the new Superpowers supplement for it. Titan Effect is a game where the players are secret agents with biogenetic powers fighting a secret war in our contemporary world with forces who seek to control the eugenic future of humanity. Christian tells the story of how the concept turned into an RPG. Blythe faces the Games Master screen as we review, apparently at random, some of the best settings that we've played in. We also talk about a new review that tackles the thorny issue of us recording some segments in an actual pub. Some people really struggle to hear what we're saying above the hubbub, while others enjoy the atmos. I'm not sure if we resolve the issue, but this is a non-wig episode. A non-wig episode. All that will become clear later. We also have an addition to our ever-expanding Appendix G, the books, films, TV that inspired us back in the day. Member of the Australian chapter of the Grog Squad, Michael Butler, asks, who watches the Watchmen? But enough of this, I have a cold. Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Open box.
Okay, welcome to Open Box, the part of the podcast where we look backwards to look forwards, how our gaming of the past have influenced the players that we are today. And joining me in the Zoom of role-playing rambling, I've got Christian Nommay from Knight Errant Media. Hello there, Christian.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Where in the world are you, Christian? Where you beaming in from?
I'm living in Quebec City, but I'm originally from Paris in France.
So what's your background in role-playing? How did you start in role-playing back in Paris?
Well, as a player, I discovered RPGs at 12 years old, and I started with Star Wars RPG. I was a huge Star Wars fan at that time, and when I discovered that there was an RPG, I hadn't any knowledge about role-playing games before that. So when I opened my first RPG book, it was like, like my true calling, I would say. And after that, the passion for RPGs never left me. So I played a lot of other RPGs, Tor, Deadlands, Savage Worlds, Shadowrun, Cyberpunk 2020.
What's the scene like in Paris?
During when I was a teenager, there was a small community. It's growing bigger and bigger, like everywhere else, because there's a huge small clubs when we gathered and played RPGs, or only with friends, during the weekends. and we played a lot of different RPGs because we had a thirst for to discover new game, new universe, and there had been a lot of great French RPG designers. I played a lot of French RPGs. RPGs that I loved the most was Nephilim. It still exists today. It's a esoteric RPG when you play some sort of angels that reincarnate in different timelines. The goal of the game is like to attain some kind of state called the Agartha, and you explore a lot of stuff. You're hunted by Templars and all kind of stuff. There were also In Nomine Satanis and Magna Veritas, which was a game where you could play angels or demons, and it was very popular in France, and it was also very politically incorrect.
I know with Nephilim, that's a Chaosium game, wasn't it? That didn't they do that in the 90s?
Yes, they did it in the 90s. It was popular in France and the rest of Europe, I think, but I don't. Each time I speak to people in the US about Nephilim, nobody heard about it.
You mentioned Deadlands and Savage Worlds, and we're looking at Savage Worlds. So, how did you get into Savage Worlds?
Well, I get into Savage World with Deadlands. I started playing it when it was first released in the 90s, and it's one of my favorite RPG. A few years after, when I was looking for a new edition of Deadlands, I discovered that there was something new called Savage Worlds that was using some of Deadlands rules and making it more simple and fun to use. And when I started reading it, I was just amazed by how great the rules were to create any setting you wanted. There was a big emphasis on pulp settings, but you could do almost anything, fantasy, modern settings, historical, science fiction. And so that's how I discovered it.
What was it initially that appealed to you about Deadlands? Because we've been playing quite a bit of Deadlands, and that was really our way into Savage Worlds as well.
Deadlands, that wasn't difficult for me. I'm a huge fan of Sergio Leone, so I watched a lot of Western spaghettis when I was a kid and teenager. So discovering Deadlands was like seeing that kind of Westerns with everything else that I loved, like steampunk, Toulouse horror, and all kind of stuff mixed up together. And I just loved it, and when I introduced it to my friends in France, they were all fans of the setting, and we started. I started with a one shot, and it became a long campaign after that.
And you mentioned the rules, and it was the rules that appealed to you. So how soon after discovering Savage Worlds did you start creating your own settings?
Well, when I discovered Savage Worlds, I started to right away to do my own settings because I had a lot of stories or comic books that I loved that I wanted to adapt right away. I think the first adventure that I wrote for Savage Worlds for my friends was an adaptation of the anime Cowboy Bebop, and it was perfect for it because it was very simple and fast to adapt and to play with it.
And how soon did Titan Effect start to emerge? Is that a fairly new one, or did you explore some of the ideas of Titan Effect early on?
No, not at that point. Titan Effect started very differently because I was only doing RPGs as a game master and player. But at that point, I had no ambition to become an RPG creator. But I had ambitions to become a screenwriter and comic book writer. And I was working on this universe that didn't have any name at that point. mixing cyberpunk, biopunk, all kinds of video games and anime ideas that I loved, and I wanted to put all that together. At first, it was some kind of big mess, but there was the DNA of Titan Effect was there. After a few years of working on that project, at first I tried to develop it as an animated series project. It didn't work out because I had some setbacks with different producers who weren't very serious about it. Then I started to work on a comic book project. And again, it failed because the main artist I was working with let me down at the last minute. And I already invested some money in it and a lot of time. And I had to do all over again. And at that point, I was kind of tired of having all these setbacks and failures. And I just needed to have something finished, finished product. That's something that I haven't managed so far to do. And one of my friends in France started to give me the idea of telling me, why are you not making this into an RPG, like a Savage World setting? It popped up like that, and that's how I started to adapt Titan Effect into a Savage World setting.
So it started as another project that transferred into this. You should give a pitch for our listeners who may not have experienced Titan Effect. So what's the pitch for the game?
So the pitch is Titan Effect is a genre-bending setting mixing spy thriller, biopunk, superheroes. It's a world where players are plunged into a world with conspiracies, secret organization, bioengineered creatures, and psychic phenomena. And this world, similar to ours, but different with all the things that I mentioned earlier. Players play spies gifted with special abilities. Some have psychic powers, others have been bioengineered, created, or modified. And they try to basically to save the world from chaos without losing their own soul in the process. It's a setting where the frontier between good and evil is often blurred.
Yeah, that's very true. What struck me about the setting is that element of espionage. The clandestine behaviour and tradecraft is going to serve you well as you do these adventures.
Exactly.
I heard of it because I was interested in the game Cyworld. I don't know if you remember that game from Fantasy Games Unlimited in the early 80s. And,
I never heard of it when I started working on Titan Effect, but a few people mentioned it to me after I released Titan Effect a few years ago.
Yeah, and people say, "Oh, well, if you like Cyworld, then you'll love Titan Effect," and it's true. I think it's obviously it's quite underdeveloped in Cyworld, but this is a fully worked out setting with all different factions as well, isn't there?
So in Titan Effect, there's a secret war called the Great Game. It's a direct reference to a term used in the Cold War during with different countries fighting each other and spying on each other. In this Great Game, the goal is to control human evolution biologically. There's different factions fighting each other in the secret war. So the first one is the Olympians. It's some kind of Illuminati group controlling the world. Especially, it had a great influence on the banking, they control the military, different intelligence agencies, and of course, a lot of multinational companies. There's Ares, who's a private military company, who's working for the Olympians and who's serving as their secret guard. They do all their dirty work, and they're also charged to create bio-augmented soldiers. So some of these soldiers can transform into a werebeast, like a werewolf or werebear, and others have been enhanced with animal DNA, and so they have physical traits of animal and humans together, and they have different abilities according to the DNA that have been enhanced with. After that, you have Typhoon, who's a bioterrorist organization with a post-human agenda. Basically, they're trying to rewrite human DNA and create a new species because they believe that humanity won't survive what's coming. whether it's climate change and all kind of nasty stuff coming. So they believe that to survive, they have to change humanity to make it evolve into different species. You have also the Directorate, who's a Russian secret organization, who's trying to create some kind of new Russian empire dominated by psychic, and eventually after that to dominate the rest of the world. And you have also a lot of other different minor factions that gravitate around these major factions.
What I like about these factions is usually in role-playing games, when you've got factions, they're usually highly exaggerated, and there's not a lot of subtlety with them. Whereas in this, they are interesting, and I think a lot of the adventures that I've experienced are about uncovering some of those agencies that are at work behind the scenes.
Yes, I try to keep them grounded as possible, and to not making them, absolutely evil. Each one of these organizations have a reason to do what they're doing. Of course, they're misguided, but their reason can make some sense sometimes. So the players work for an organization called the Spear, who's trying to fight against all this faction, because the Spear thinks that its role to preserve the world and protect it from all these evil factions. And sometimes the players can be forced to make some difficult choice, or sometimes even question their own loyalty to the Spear, because they realize that maybe their enemies in front of them have a point about doing what they're doing.
And you've just released on PDF the next edition, haven't you? The Declassified edition. So how does that change from the first edition?
Well, when I released Titan Effect, the first edition, I had really bad timing, because right after that, Pinnacle Entertainment Group released Savage World Adventure Edition, which is the latest edition of Savage Worlds. And it changed a lot of things. So at the time, I released a free conversion guide to make the setting compatible with that new edition of Savage Worlds. But when I heard that they were making a new Superpowers Companion, because Titan Effect used Savage Worlds core rules and the Superpowers Companion, I had to think about either I was updating the game, the setting, or making some kind of 1.5 edition which would be fully compatible with this new Superpowers Companion, and which will also allow me to add some new stuff, or add some stuff that I wanted to put into the setting book for the first edition, and I couldn't. I released the Declassified edition. The new thing that there's in it, there's a new short comic book that is used as some kind of opening scene. So a 8-page comic book with a big action sequence, like a James Bond movie. There's rules to play by augmented soldier as peer agents. That's something that a lot of people ask when I released the first edition of Titan Effect. I also added the Spear Unit Guides, which is some kind of it's an alternate version of campaign IDs, which basically players work for one of the Spear units, and each one of the units has different purpose and roles. So, according to the game master's campaign, there's a lot of different units that can suit the players and the game master. So there's unit who is more specialized in rescue operations, another more involved in traditional espionage and investigation. Another one was more action oriented. So there's a unit for every kind of taste.
Yeah, and those units can help shape some of the adventures that are possible.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I found that it's good for one shots, because it is very often mission based, isn't it? What's your plans with it? Are you going? Are there some adventures planned, campaigns, that kind of thing?
So yes, I have several adventures that I'd like to write for Titan Effect. There's also a campaigns book that I've started to work on. I have to juggle between different projects, so it's taking me a lot of time. And of course, Declassified, I had to put all that on hold for a while, but now I'm working on it again. I also started to work on the idea of a spin-off of Titan Effect, which would take place further in the future with some kind of post-apocalyptic setting, mixing cyberpunk, post-apocalyptic. One of the main inspiration for that is the manga Appleseed. But for the moment, it's still just a concept that I've started to work on, but it won't be released anytime soon.
I think what the game does as well is really bring out how Savage Worlds deals with superpowers. So do you want to talk about that and how the superpowers work within Titan Effect?
It was kind of natural because the idea that I had for Titan Effect at first, it was very superhero oriented because the characters could do a lot of powerful stuff that you see in manga or anime. And when I read the Superpowers Companion, it was a natural fit to adapt Titan Effect because the way it works, you have the powers or more effects, and the power itself is more like what you put around it. So you can have a power attack, but it can be anything from using claws, horns, or spitting venom or that kind of stuff. As I wanted it to be grounded as possible, with the Superpowers Companion, you have different level of power campaign, and the street level campaign was something that was perfect for Savage World because characters could earn enough power to have something interesting, but at the same time, they wouldn't be too powerful to unbalance the game.
It's got a more horizontal structure, hasn't it, than some games where it levels raised vertically. You can build characters by having additional effects and additional features. So I think it really lends itself to a superpower game.
Yeah, when the players start, the characters are not all powerful. There's a learning curve. So they have a certain number of powers when they start the character. And as they progress in the campaign, they become more powerful and discover how to use their power more efficiently.
And it's really good that the start of the first edition, and as you say, in the second edition, it's grounded itself back in that comic book setting. I mean, now that the role-playing game's taken off, have you got plans to fulfill your original ambition to create some other media around this?
Oh, I definitely have plans to do that. I'm actually working with a producer to try to make an anime project. So something that I initially wanted to do with Titan Effect. And for the moment, I can't say anything beside that I'm working with someone very serious and who have a lot of interesting connections in Hollywood. So hopefully this will lead somewhere. And I'm also planning to continue working on the comic book.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing that development because it is a great setting, and I'm really.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Something that I always wanted to do with Titan Effect is that the RPG was the base for the world, but everything that I developed in parallel, like a comic book project or an anime, could be tied to the RPG. It's not like a mere adaptation. It's more like it's a transmedia project. So every new medium expand the world a different way with a different point of view and characters.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how it develops because I've enjoyed playing it. So
I'm happy to hear that.
It's great to have you on. Thank you very much, Christian.
Thanks to you.
Games Master Screen. Welcome to the Zoom of Role-Playing Rambling, where Blythe is about to face the Games Master's screen. I've got a table which features some of the favourite settings of Savage Worlds, and we'll roll apparently at random on the table and explore some of them. But before we go into that, we've had a review, and you know I like reading these reviews because they can often explain what we're doing better than we can. And this is one from the United States of America. I want to read it out because we could have a chat about some of the practicalities of recording this podcast. The noise, 3 stars. This would easily be 5 stars, but honestly, I would like to hear what these two have to say. But the fact that half of every episode is recorded in one of England's noisiest pubs, it's ridiculous. We can't hear you over the loud music and drunken blatherings and noisy doors and the everything. I've been quiet about this for so long, but enough is enough.
I would agree. I think it could be a 5-star podcast if we didn't record it in a pub and have huge amounts of alcohol while we recorded it. I think, does that know what he means? That's my view. It could easily be 5 stars if it wasn't for our drunken blatherings, which knocks it down to a 3.
So somebody has made that point that, you should be careful what you wish for, because if you clear out the background noise, you might have to listen to what we're actually saying and realise.
Yeah, exactly. At least rubbish. you can tune us out and listen to, I don't know, Gary Newman or something on the jukebox, can't you? There is this, there is that benefit.
It's the practicalities, isn't it, of recording this? So we have to do it in stolen moments when we can. To fit it in. Yeah. So it's either after work where we're in one of those rooms, which is like a storeroom, isn't it? Which is huge and hollow and echoey. It's a vast empty space full of boxes.
I think as well, it's fair to say we don't record in England's noisiest pub.
We don't.
We try and record in England's quietest pub. I suppose that's what's odd about it, isn't it, really? That when we're recording it in the pub, it's quiet. So it might be early afternoon and the pub is empty and we're in the snug of the Lasagari and it's actually quite quiet. It's only when you listen to the recording that the slamming of that noisy toilet door is a bit annoying. When we're recording, it's not annoying.
You could say it's an oasis of calm that plays a lot of Oasis.
You could, yeah. At an acceptable level, but, you can't please all the people all the time, can you?
No.
We like recording it in the pub. That's what really matters, isn't it? We like it because we're in the pub. It's great.
I accept though for new listeners, it must be hard to tune in. I mean, we can do it over Zoom like we're doing now, but it means that I have to keep asking you questions as though I'm interviewing you, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, it does like what you just did that. Yeah.
Or leave long pregnant pauses in the hope that you'll step in.
The hope I'll step in, yeah.
And we don't talk like that. We don't talk like that, do we? We talk over each other. And
if you want a bit of spontaneity and that kind of thing, you have to put up with the pub. Yeah. That guy could be on the panel for the Ennis, couldn't he? You put your name forward and it's all, that crap, it's done in a pub. He'd a pair of idiots in a pub. He'd be right, wouldn't he? But you'll never get an any. So just resign yourself to that.
There is an alternative. We could go to Wetherspoons, who famously don't play music or sell decent beer. We could go there, couldn't we? That'd be quieter.
It would be quiet in Wetherspoons, but yeah, that might be a rather hostile environment in a Wetherspoons in Bolton. They might be the last podcast we ever do.
Yeah. No problem with the noisy toilet door because they just do it where they are, don't they? So anyway, let's move on because there is a lot to cover because we're covering settings. With these settings, we're going to have to be quite tight with them because you could cover. There's a lot to cover, and you could actually dedicate a podcast to each of them, really, because they're so rich and broad and full of features for gaming that it is possible to do that.
I think as well, it's fair to say that we talked about this before, haven't we? That when I first encountered Savage Worlds, I didn't quite know what to do with it, and it's only when you get into the settings that Savage Worlds as a generic system kind of falls into place a little bit. I think it kind of falls into, well, it did for me anyway. It kind of clicked with my brain when I dropped it into a setting and thought, right, okay, so some of these bits in the game aren't that relevant. Other bits are more relevant. And also within the settings, there are little subsystems, aren't there, as well, which we might get on to talking about. So there are these subsystems within the settings that using the cards and using bits of the rules that try and enhance elements of those settings.
I think, the emphasis on all of these settings is predominantly on action. And it is an action-focused game, isn't it? That is what it looks for. Let's roll on the table anyway. Here goes. I've got a wild die as well, so let's see how we go. Whoa! We scored an ace. We're exploding away here because we've got Deadlands.
Deadlands. Of course, yeah. Deadlands, which was the first setting. I think it was the first setting I ran Savage Worlds in. Deadlands.
First one. Is it the first one we played? I can't remember the order of this, whether we play. I think we may have played some 2000 AD Savage Worlds before we actually played Deadlands with Gaz from the Smart Party.
Yeah. We played it with Gaz ran some, didn't he? And then I got into it and I ran too. It was the first Savage Worlds that I ran. I think it's the only Savage Worlds I've run, haven't I? I think I've only ever run Savage Worlds as Deadlands. But Deadlands is a great setting. Really good setting. The Wild West, isn't it? So you know what's not to like about the Wild West. And every time I've played it with people, they all kind of connect to it. That it's laden with all those cliches from westerns. So it's very, very easy to create a character, and it's very, very easy to kind of come up with storylines and NPCs and situations and draw on all that wealth of stuff from westerns that you watched as a kid on the TV. Because I think when we were kids, the TV was awash with westerns, wasn't it? Because they were all made in the kind of 50s and 60s, weren't they? And then all ended up on the telly in the 70s and 80s. So I can remember Monday night, as a kid, there was always some western on with Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, that kind of thing. So you kind of draw on all those cliches and tropes from westerns. So it's a great setting from that point of view. And also, again, coming back to this thing of character creation in Savage Worlds, when you first encounter Savage Worlds, it gives you a character creation system that has all these hindrances and all these edges and things like that. Bewildering is the wrong word, but there's a lot to it, and you think, all right, so I can just pick these things and create a character, and perhaps you don't quite know what you would do with it. But of course, when I discovered Deadlands, it's much easier then, because you look at the Western and you think, right, okay, I get it. I'm in a Western. Let's think about those characters from Westerns. And then it's very easy to construct a character using those hindrances and those edges once you've got a setting to position the character in, I suppose.
Am I right in saying in the new edition of it, because you went big on the new edition, didn't you, on the Kickstarter? In the new edition, you get more archetypes, don't you? You get more playbooks, if you like, and versions of characters.
Well, with the new version, I found it's a bit lighter on the background. So there is this story in Deadlands. The setting, for those who don't know, it's the Wild West, but it's a Wild West where certain, without giving too much away, certain characters have kind of opened a gate into hell and brought these evil spirits into the world who are trying to manipulate and creating levels of fear amongst the population. And when the levels of fear become so high, then these reckoners, as they're called, will be able to step into the world. That's the basic gist of it. The new version is a bit lighter on the setting, on that, not the setting, but lighter on that kind of background stuff, which is no bad thing, really.
But there's more archetypes, isn't there? I know that there's more choices. When you presented the latest version to us, you gave us more choices.
Yeah. I suppose that's what I mean. They seem to have kind of put an emphasis on playing it rather than the background, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
In the new version. The new version's a lot slimmer and slicker in terms of the way it presents itself than the. I mean, not the original, because I think there's been several versions of it, haven't there? The original Deadlands wasn't Savage Worlds, was it? But I've got copies of the edition prior to the new edition.
Well, we played some of that, didn't we? It uses a subsystem, as you mentioned, like for quick draw. I seem to remember that it was like a poker game, wasn't it?
Yeah, in the edition previously, they have rules for gunfights. So again, that's the thing about a little subsystem. So there's this rule, good to classic gunfight where you face down an opponent in the street kind of thing. And in this edition prior to this one, it was done as like poker hands. So you deal cards, and the poker hands would decide ultimately who drew first. And the new system, the new version does a similar thing. It's a bit simpler. But it allows you to use things like taunting and intimidating and that kind of thing before you draw to get an advantage on your opponent. So it is like a little game within a game when you get a gunfight. It's quite exciting the way that they kind of build that into the game. It's not just a case of roll initiative and who shoots first. You do this thing where you get cards. Keep your cards close to your chest until it's time to draw, and that decides who goes first, who shoots first rather.
What I find that it's quite difficult with it is a reason for your characters to be together, because the archetypes are so I played a Revenant, didn't I? The what they called?
Yeah, Harrowed. That's it. When you die, if your character dies in Deadlands, you can make a roll to see if you come back as an undead cowboy kind of thing. Part of the fear thing, isn't it? That the dead are right. It's not all zombies. That's wrong. There are monsters in it, but all the monsters are a product of these evil spirits that have been let into the world.
So the Harrowed inspired Deadlands. I think it was the image of having the Harrowed on the front of cover. Yeah. It's what drove the game to be produced. These are characters that have been killed, and they're maintained by this spirit that inhabits them and can sometimes get the better of them. So you have a usage dice that diminishes over time, and eventually you could get possessed or taken over. And one of the hindrances is you've got to satisfy that spirit, and that might involve, it does involve like having to murder someone every sort. So a great concept for a character, until you put it alongside, I don't know, the Rhinestone Kid or, some, why on earth would a bunch of characters come around a figure like that? You can see the High Plains Drifter.
Yeah. But it does have certain agencies in it, doesn't it? And the idea, like there's the Twilight Legion, which are a secret society of people who are kind of committed to sorting out this problem with the monsters and that kind of thing, suppressing these monsters and these fear. Because it does this thing as well, doesn't it, with fear levels. So each community has a fear level. By your characters doing stuff, the fear level can go up or down depending on how successful they are. So I suppose behind it, there is this idea, isn't there, of investigators is possibly the wrong word, but a group of vigilantes or unofficial lawmen, that kind of thing, that go around investigating these problems. And that's one of the ideas. You don't have to do it like that, but that's one of the ideas that keeps the game going, I suppose, that you're, say one of the Twilight Legion, one of these because in the Headstone Hill one that I ran, you were part of the Twilight Legion, weren't you? So your character was Harrowed, and the Legion felt it was useful to have you as part of the group because you might offer certain insights and benefits. So whilst the group might not like you particularly, I'll be a bit worried about you. They're not just a bunch of random people hanging out together. There is an organisation behind it. And that's one of the things that Deadlands has in it. In fact, I think I might be wrong here, but I think in the new version that is brought to bear a little bit more with those groups and organisations, the idea that you're part of one of those.
And I think it needs to be, because all of the archetypes and all of the tropes from cowboys are about the individual, aren't they? It's not really. Maybe the Wild Bunch is an exception, but there are not many films or features that around groups of cowboys being together. I just remember in that early game that we played with Gaz and Baz, we sort of had an existential crisis of wondering what were we doing? Why were we doing it? Why were we going town to town causing mayhem? What was the purpose? What were we doing here?
Yeah. And I think in the Headstone Hill one, you are actually recruited, aren't you, by the Twilight Legion. You're actually given a job, aren't you, where one of the agents has gone missing and you are also agents. So it's a little bit more direct, I think, in terms of what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be doing it. But you're right. Yeah, it could be a problem because, as you say, they are kind of disparate. You've got things like Chai Master, haven't you? Kind of kung fu Chinese immigrant sort of character. You've got them, and then you've got the Harrod, and then you've got other bits. And you think, yeah, why would they all be together? Why would they all be together? But it is a world with zombies and evil spirits and magic. So
and weird science.
That's the least of your worries.
I have to say, every time I've played it, I've had tremendous fun doing it. It does lend itself to, as we keep saying about Savage World action. Yeah, it is good fun to play it.
It's easy to run and easy to come up with ideas for, and it's easy to run the pre-written adventures. Simply because, as I said earlier, I think the idea of the Western are a really good adventure setting, and yet there's not that many of them about in the role-playing world. I know someone will write in there with a list of 20, but in terms of obvious choices, there's not that many, is there, really?
There's not, but I would argue as we go through this list that many of the settings for Savage Worlds have Western sensibilities. In that,
oh yeah. You can say, can't you? I mean, you can say that about lots of fantasy and sci-fi settings that they have a Western sensibility. Like Star Wars, famously, that's a bit like a Western. All sorts of games have that sensibility, but there's not many that are actually Westerns as set in the Western setting. And so I think it's easy to run because, like I said earlier, you can draw on all those kind of cliches and tropes and characters from Westerns.
And I think the reason why games do have that kind of undercurrent is because of the lawlessness and the moral certainties that Westerns have, isn't it? I think that's why it's appealing to gamers, because there's a sort of anything goes within reason sensibility about it.
Yeah, and you can there's moral certainties, and also you can break the law and shoot people with a sort of sense of moral certainty, So you can do stuff, and I suppose get away with it because you can run from one town to the next, can't you, as an outlaw? And people, whenever I play it, people want a gunfight. They want to go into a town where there's a crooked lawman who runs the town. They want a gunfight. They want a train robbery. They want a bank robbery. They want all those things. So it's very easy to kind of provide that for people. People kind of naturally enjoy it, I think, for that reason.
Let's roll on the table again. Okay, so this next one on the list is Slipstream. So Slipstream is a retro Flash Gordon type Saturday matinee in space. Cowboys in space, isn't it? There is a Flash Gordon companion, isn't there, to Savage Worlds? But this is very much its own galaxy, its own universe of characters and different alien species across the galaxy. And we completed a complete campaign with this over a period of years. And it is great fun, and it does draw out all the great things about Savage Worlds that we've mentioned.
It's done as a Flash Gordon style, 1930s or 40s kind of sci-fi, isn't it? That's the way it's done. And you've got Queen. There's a big villain. It's kind of Ming the Merciless type villain, isn't there? And Queen Anathraxa.
I thought she's like a Servalan, isn't she? In Blake.
She's a cross between Ming the Merciless and Servalan, isn't she? I suppose. Yeah. He was a great kind of villain in it. And again, I suppose like Deadlands, it's giving you that's another parallel, isn't it? It's giving you a very strong villain. So in Deadlands, you've got the Reckoners and whilst it's not a specific villain, although there are some very, very strong specific villains in Deadlands. This does a similar thing, doesn't it? It presents the players with a force for an unambiguous force for evil in the universe that is the enemy. So it's not an ambiguous thing. She's a baddie, and she must be stopped. That's the gist of that campaign, isn't it? It's not room for negotiation.
And the planetary system is, again, very broadly drawn. So you've got the robot planet, you've got the fire planet, you've got the ice planet, you've got the ocean planet. So
you got the different peoples. I mean, you got the insect people and the bird people and the this and that. It is very, very broadly drawn.
And for years, I think devilment really, picked a character, didn't I? I picked a character that I thought would be good fun, not realising that I'd be stuck with this character for years. I played a Septosarian, and a Septosarian essentially is a 6 foot long slug with a single foot that can move quite quickly, and in moments of stress emits a noxious cloud of gas. It was a farting slug in space.
What for you?
Because we played it over a period of time, I was able to work through the hindrances, because one of the things is I was all thumbs, so I couldn't use guns particularly well. And so I found that I had to get into the thick of combat in order to emit my noxious gas to shake the people around me. But I was incredibly vulnerable to being attacked by these Anathraxan warriors.
Yeah, well, I played a Cyclops, as in PSI, psychic Cyclops, which is like a one-eyed, this kind of short, stubby, one-eyed character who had psychic powers. I quite enjoyed it. It was about being a wizard, really. I didn't quite pick it for that reason, but ultimately you become like the wizard with psychic powers, where you can do all sorts of stuff. And it was interesting playing that character, actually, because I think one of the peculiar things about Savage Worlds is because you just build your character and you pick edges and hindrances, you can always pick edges which are special power. You can pick a powers edge, can't you? So it's got like magic, weird science, psychic powers. So you could pick a power edge for your character. And what's interesting is at first, when you start playing Savage Worlds, right at the beginning, when your characters are beginning, it seems like those characters with the power edges are more powerful. But what's interesting about it is as you progress, if you've got powers, you realize how the system makes you spend your advances on the powers to make yourself good at stuff. And you can't spend it on some of the other stuff that people have got. So, for example, my Cyclops character was quite powerful until he ran out of power points. And then he was kind of quite weak. And initially that wasn't the case. Right at the beginning, that wasn't the case. I had psychic powers and no one else did. And that we were all the same, but I had psychic powers and that was great. I felt more powerful. But the game system does quite a good job of giving you that decision. You can still have powers, but they'll be quite weak unless you spend your advances on your stats or your skills, or you can spend your advances on powers, but your advances are going to be less on your stats. And over time, it's interesting to play someone like that over a long time, because you realize the system is quite well balanced in the long run. It doesn't seem like it at first, because to have a power edge means, yeah, I can do magic and no one else can, and we're all pretty much the same. But I can do magic. But eventually, it does level out a bit, and that was the interesting thing about Slipstream, to see that come into play and kick in.
We didn't run it, did we? It was Steve who ran the game, complete with Starfleet battles and cast of thousands. We were had to mow our way through. There was some great epic moments, diffusing gigantic robotic spiders. It uses the plot point approach, doesn't it? Which is one of the innovations of Savage Worlds and Pinnacle and these products that they produce, they use this plot point approach, which is it's the same for that one you run for Deadlands, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Headstone. Well, the Headstone Hill thing is peculiar because it's plot point, and then it also wants to be a sandbox, which I'm not quite sure they're necessarily compatible. Because the way the plot points seem to work is as the name suggests, it moves you to various plot points, doesn't it? So it moves you around to various set pieces. Plot point campaigns are very much about set pieces, aren't they? You know, where it moves you from one thing to another. And the horror at Headstone Hill, whilst it's a good campaign, it had plot points in it, but then it also said, oh, let the players do what they want, let them wander around. And you think, well, it doesn't quite work like that then, does it? Because some of the plot points are going to be missed because the characters decide not to go there or do things, whereas the plot point thing is very much you do this, then you do that, then you do this, then you do that kind of thing. At least that's my reading of it anyway. That's my experience of it.
Yeah, there's some flexibility within that, isn't there? But you're right. I think the thing in Slipstream, you went from set piece to set piece, and Anathraxa was always one step ahead of you, wasn't she? And that went all the way to its ultimate conclusion. Actually,
yeah,
she always managed to get away, as they always did in 1930s.
Of course, yeah, get away and fight another day, kind of thing.
Yeah. I've not read a plot point when I've seen Pirate Set. I think that's one of the ones
50,000 Fathoms, isn't it? Yeah, there's
50,000 Fathoms.
Yeah,
which was the first plot point campaign, I think.
Yeah, and very, very interestingly, that is very similar to Slipstream. It works in almost exactly the same way, that you're on a pirate ship and you get sucked down a whirlpool, you know, and end up in this other world, which is a bit like a 18th century pirate world, but it's got some other mysterious races in it and that kind of. I think it's got these witches who are the kind of villains who are at the center of things. But it's like Slipstream, you know, in the same way that Slipstream is where your planet has been sucked through this black hole and popped into a parallel universe, the Slipstream. It's the same kind of thing. Your pirate ship gets sucked through a whirlpool and pops into a world with different islands and different races and that kind of thing. It's very, very, very similar, almost really the same kind of thing.
So pirates, cowboys, and cowboys in space. This is what it's about, isn't it? This is what we want, right?
I think I'd say what's interesting as well about Slipstream. Do you know? I think it's interesting that we all played aliens. None of us went for humans. I thought it was very strange that we all went for alien races, didn't we? And in a way, that setting of Slipstream and Savage Worlds combined makes playing an alien quite appealing, I think. Because sometimes in games, playing a non-human, or particularly an alien, it can be a bit odd in that as a player. I don't know about you, but sometimes you worry you're not going to do them justice because they're supposed to be an alien, aren't they? But it can be tricky from a role-playing perspective. Whereas in Slipstream, because it's very colourful, and very kind of, like you say, Flash Gordon, 1930 sort of stuff. It was very easy to play aliens, wasn't it?
No risk of doing it wrong.
It felt quite comfortable.
Yeah. Well, it was great fun to spend a couple of years playing Slipstream. And it's always good to finish a campaign, isn't it? It's always good to get to the end of it. So that was great. Let's roll again. Oh, okay. It's a similar campaign that we've been playing is Necessary Evil. So this is, imagine Suicide Squad on a planet where all the good guys have disappeared and aliens have taken over. So the last bastion of humanity are the evil superheroes that come together to try and defeat this alien invasion. Again, a tremendous setting with great fun, and there's nothing better than playing evil characters, I'd say. I don't know why I'm taken to it, but
as you say, yeah.
So there's two things about this. So that point of playing evil characters, but again, this is one where you're playing characters with superpowers. you're right. I think what you were saying about the powers is good how it's handled in Savage Worlds, because the way that it describes it is that it's a horizontal system rather than a vertical system. So as you move up levels, there's only really 4 levels, isn't there? Like novice, 2 seasons, and then ultimately veteran. But once you're in those levels, you can pick advances that move you along a horizontal scale. And you really see that working when it comes to being superheroes with superpowers. It becomes more acute, I think.
It's the first superpower game we've played, isn't it?
Yeah, played a bit of Golden Heroes, haven't we? But we
played a bit of Golden Heroes, but not a lot of Golden. It's certainly the first superpowered game that we've played over a prolonged period as a campaign. Superhero role playing's not really been our thing, has it? Over the length of time, pre Deep Freeze and post Deep Freeze, it's not really been a thing we've gone for.
I'm not really drawn towards superhero games naturally, I think, even though we got saturation point with TV serials and movies about superheroes. I'm not naturally drawn towards the superhero genre for games.
No, I'm not, I suppose. And I suppose part of it is with superheroes, you always think, would it all be about fights? Because that's what a lot of superhero stuff is, isn't it? Like the powers really kick in when you're fighting a monster or a giant robot or a supervillain. And it's probably fair to say that it is about fights, but as we've said, Savage Worlds does action and fights really well. So it's a good mixture, isn't it, to use Savage Worlds for superheroes? Because if superhero role playing is all about action, Savage Worlds is perfect. I mean, as we've said, if it's got a downside, it's that Savage Worlds doesn't handle some of the more subtler aspects of role playing particularly well.
But if you want to be on the back of a raft with a super powered gun blowing up buildings, fill your boots, because it deals with that really well, doesn't it? I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
If you want to have an army of minions who are doing your every bidding to bring down the aliens, then do it. Come on.
It's like my character, isn't it? Yeah. I picked the super speed thing, didn't I? And that's been there's been a lot of fun, hasn't it? That she's really quick. Quantum, my superhero, she's really quick to the point now where I think she's like as fast as speed of sound. So she's like faster than the speed of sound. And of course that means you're hard to hit, and you can also fly at people and punch them. And that's a kind of example where that superpower in some games might be handled in a very, very complicated way. It might be very, very complicated to work in this character that's really fast, and that means she's difficult to hit, and then she can do extra damage when she hits someone that comes at them at high speed and all that kind of stuff. But Savage Worlds does it really, really well, doesn't it? It's very slick and quick and easy in the way, once you get your head around the system, building those superpowers in is very easy, and it doesn't slow the combat down, does it? I think that would always be the thing with superpowers. Would it just get really, really complicated if all these players have different powers and different this and different that, and then the villains have got powers? Because in Necessary Evil, that is what happens, isn't it? You got 5 superheroes, and we end up meeting other superheroes or aliens or that kind of thing we're fighting. Everyone's got powers, and yet Savage Worlds does deal with it really, really simply and slickly, and it works very well. There's no real delays on the combat system.
I've got to mention that my character is kind of a reverse Batman, isn't he? He's a wealthy industrialist gecko who his hindrance is that every round of combat, my first round has to be taken up by an evil monologue. So
yeah.
Which is great. Start every fight by saying what I'm going to do to them and boasting about our capabilities. Yeah.
Well, it's great Necessary Evil because, as you say, you're playing the bad guys. But what makes it interesting is you're playing the bad guys who have to be the good guys. So it's not as simple as just being the villains. You are actually humanity's last hope, aren't you? So you're villains, but you're forced into being heroes, really.
Yes.
Which makes it kind of even more fun.
Yep, and we're continuing that, aren't we? Continuing the campaign. Again, another plot point campaign, which continues in another few weeks. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, let's roll again. Okay, the next one is, I think this is one that we've experienced as a one-shot, but I would love to do more of. And that's A Day After Ragnarok, which is Ken Hite's setting. During the Second World War, the Nazis managed to summon the Midgard serpent from the ocean. Truman hit it with nuclear weapons, and now there is a serpent lying across Europe. Completely bonkers setting, but in many ways incredible because it brings together all the stuff that we've been talking about. And because of the appearance of the serpent, at Hereford, there is a cut into the serpent's body because it's light across England, and they're using it to create Orphic tech. So it's kind of caused a revolution. And you've got baddies, you've got Nazis that are still around, and you've got the commies as well on the other side of this serpent curtain that's across Europe. So it's got everything you need in big, bold and bright colours, and with a splash of Howard S. Conan as well.
Yeah, I remember when you first described it to me, and I thought, that sounds rubbish. That sounds stupid and rubbish. Maybe it's your description. I wouldn't want to say, but then when we played a one shot, and I got hold of it as well, I've got it as well. The setting, it's just sort of weirdly fantastic. It's odd how he gets away with it because it just sounds a stupid, bonkers idea where you think, come on, there's limits to these things, isn't there? There are limits to this fantasy stuff. Can't do that, but it's just really, really good, isn't it? A lot of fun.
A lot of fun, and I think it passes the improv rad test, so the improvised radio theatre with dice. Roger on that podcast always says that the mark of a good setting is one where you can get a pen and a piece of paper and immediately write down 6 ideas that you could run in it. And it is that kind of setting that you can very quickly formulate ideas of how you could use the different factions that are in there. Are they going to rebuild society? Or are they going to try and revive the war and trying to settle elements of that? There's lots of things going on that you can make stuff up on.
Yeah, and again, I suppose that's the thing. Is it's another example. All the Savage Worlds settings are like that. They're all full of ideas, aren't they? Because they are so kind of big and colourful. You know, it's very, very easy to come up with ideas.
I wanted to mention this one as well because when we did the one shot, which is I want to put it on record. I think this is the best title that I've ever come up with. It's Wages of Fear, as in serpent. And it's essentially a story of Sorcerer or Wages of Fear, where you had to accompany a volatile serpent oil across Wales in a great big explosive tanker. And there was usage dice that was steadily depleting as it was ambushed by Nazi nuns and all this cultists and everything. But what spun the game?
That's all you need, isn't it?
Yeah. What made that game that one shot interesting is the use of the adventure cards, which I think they were just like an add-on to the Kickstarter, the Kickstarter when they did the adventure edition. But I think they're great. They make a real difference to do it. So where these work is each player gets one, and in addition to their bennies, and it may just give them a little bit of an edge that they can play at any time during the session. So there's things like it bringing the cavalry. So there's a reason why help comes to support the play characters in the hour of need, that kind of thing.
And we've used those in Necessary Evil as well, haven't we? They're quite exciting, aren't they? As a player, when you get your adventure card for the session, you think, oh, is this going to be good? Or is it going to be completely useless? Or is it good, but it's only going to be good if a certain context or certain situation arises, which may or may not arise, that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you're playing Savage Worlds and you haven't got an adventure deck, I urge you to get hold of one because it does make a great addition to the game. And the one that we had with the volatile tanker, Neil Benson's character rode it into the serpent cultist temple with the intention of exploding it in there, but not forgetting that everybody was still on board. So when it exploded, it was a TPK, wasn't it? Everybody was killed because of his actions.
Yeah, he managed to kill everyone apart from himself. He managed to do a TPK when he was a player, never mind a game master. Yeah. Well done.
TPK. Apart from him, who had in a card from the adventure deck that says you walk away unharmed from a situation. So that was a great end to a fitting end to the one shot, I think. Great stuff. Right, let's roll this for the last time. Okay, last but not least is make your own setting, because that has been very much our experience over the last 4 years, hasn't it? As well as playing these settings that we've mentioned, is either Daily Dwarf creating his 2000 AD settings. I've created a Strontium Dog one shot using Savage Worlds, but it is possible to use the components to create your own.
You've done Planet of the Apes as well, haven't you?
Planet of the Apes, yeah. Kong and the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, that is perfect. It's a perfect system for that kind of thing. Again, initially I wasn't so sure, but the more I've played it, the more I think if you were going to create something, and he said this about Fate. This was one of those kind of weird tussles that's gone on in my head. That initially I thought Fate was the perfect system to replicate, because we did the Robin Sherwood thing, didn't we? And Fate seemed like a perfect thing to replicate TV shows. But I don't know if Savage Worlds might be better, because Savage Worlds just give you a bit more to sort of work with, I think. That's the trick with Savage Worlds. Even though initially when you look at it, you think, oh, like you said, there's a lot of bits, there's a lot of this, a lot of that, a lot of edges, a lot of hindrances. But actually in the long run, it makes it a bit better maybe for devising stuff. If I was going to do a TV show now, maybe it'd be Savage Worlds and not Fate that I would turn to.
Yeah.
Because there's just a bit more going on in it, a bit more detail there that you can pick out and use, I think.
Yeah. Quite a few more options to make, isn't there, if you want to build up particular scenes or particular situations. Yeah.
Even though those options at first, when you read the rules, those options at first seem a bit bewildering, a bit much, and there's a bit too many of them. But once you understand it, like you said, the system mastery thing, once you understand the system, you think, actually, there's much more here to work with than in other games.
Absolutely. And I remember when we had the discussion a few years ago, looking at Blake 7 and trying to work out how would you do Blake 7. I know that we talked about in the pub. So you'll have to imagine a toilet door opening and closing.
Going human on the jukebox.
We talked about, actually, this is the ideal way of doing it, isn't it? Because when we talked about Blake 7, we said that the system would need to reflect the personalities of the characters that are in there. And that's what it does well, isn't it? The edges and hindrances give you a quick descriptor of how that would work, and in some cases give some mechanical benefit or hindrance, but it is a good way of describing who the character is.
And the hindrances are good in the way they work, because the way it says you should do them is that they're a role-playing tool, obviously, but also if you put yourself in jeopardy because of a hindrance, you're supposed to win a Benny, aren't you? You can win a Benny, which, for a reroll. So it has a simple mechanic, whereas I think in Fate, with the trouble thing, it sounds all right in principle, but then in play, it gets a bit messy and a bit complicated and a bit fiddly. Whereas in Savage Worlds, it's a simple mechanic. My hindrance is I'm greedy. Therefore, if I go for try and get some money and put myself at risk, then you might get a Benny because you're acting along with your hindrance. And that's just a nice, simple mechanic that works very well, I think.
And you can quite quickly, and this is what I found doing Planet of the Apes, for example, is look at the character types and apply a hindrance and edge to it. So with Blake 7, Villa would be yellow, wouldn't it? Because that's a hindrance if you're yellow and
it would,
more susceptible to fear and intimidation.
And Avon would have maybe ruthless and greedy, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And you can also have quick descriptors like quirks, can't you? So, for example, with Avon, you could have sardonic wit just as a descriptor, as a quirk.
Yeah. I must admit it's quite appealing. Now, maybe it's one for the future. Maybe next year I might do a Blake 7 Savage Worlds might be the thing to do.
Definitely. And maybe we could run it in the pub.
Yeah, run it in the pub, slamming doors and music.
Yeah. See, one solution, of course, could be the Sean Connery method. So, you know how Sean Connery, he has films with a wig and films without a wig.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've got Hunt for a Red October. He has a wig. Zardos doesn't have a wig.
No wig. No wig, but a mankini. Yeah.
Maybe that's what we do at the start of each episode, is that we say up front, this is a wig or no wig. So if it...
Wig being...
In the pub, yeah.
Wigs in the pub? Why is a wig in the pub? Wouldn't no wig? Well, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe if you were going to the pub... Is that because if you had a wig and you were going to the pub, you would put the wig on?
Yeah.
Going to the pub.
Yeah. Make an effort.
Or is it the case that in the pub we're more relaxed and therefore the wig comes off because it's not kind of formal?
I think I'd wear the wig in the pub in the snug.
Wig in the pub?
Yeah.
But no wig when it's not in the pub?
Yeah. So I'll just say it at the start. I won't make a big deal of it. This is a no wig episode. So this is a no wig episode. We don't have to make the effort.
Oh, this is a wig episode. Like a wig warning.
Yeah, wig warning.
Wig episode means there might be a toilet door slamming or the pub dog barking or a strange fella coming into the snug, looking around, putting us off. Because these things happen.
I don't want to alarm you, but we're on Zoom now. I'm not even wearing trousers. See you later.
The thing with the criticism of the pub, it's quite a dangerous environment for street. People should appreciate it more, I think. It's full of risk, isn't it, the pub? Really. You know, all sorts of things can happen in a pub. So really, people should appreciate the risks we're going to give them a bit of atmos on the podcast.
Cheers, Blythe. See you in a bit.
Goodbye.
Appendix G.
Welcome to Appendix G, the part of the podcast where we invite the Grog Squad to build an ever-expanding list of collectible series of influences on our gaming. And this time I'm inviting a member of the Australian division to the microphone. Welcome to Michael Butler over in Oz. How are you doing?
G'day, Dirk. I'm very well. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's great to have you on. And just tell us what you're going to be talking about for the next 20 minutes or so.
Well, only the greatest comic book ever written, by which, of course, I mean Watchmen, the 1986 opus by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. It's the only graphic novel to ever win a Hugo, and it's also the only graphic novel to be on Time's list of the 100 best English language novels from 1923 to the present.
I didn't know that. And how did you first encounter it? I've got my copy here that I got back in, I think it was 1988. Did you read the comics first, or did you pick up the collected volumes?
Yeah, no, my friend Gary, I was still in high school at the time, in year 12, and my friend Gary started picking up. It came out towards the end of 86. And we tended to share our comics, and we were just loving it. I picked up the collected edition as soon as it was published, and it had, I think, a really big impact on the industry and on a lot of readers as well. It was sort of published during that crest of dark comics. In 85, there was all 4-color Crisis on Infinite Earth, Secret Wars. Then in 86, we got Batman the Dark Knight and Mouse and Watchmen. So a real change in mood, or a new stream opened up at least.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember being struck by it when I first read it. And I seem to remember around the time it was being conflated with the emergence of Acid House, which came out at the same time because of the smiley face.
I was oblivious to that, I'm afraid. I think there was just a general shift, and if you're looking at the games too, I mean, I did a quick look on Wikipedia. In '85, we had notably Pendragon, DC Heroes, and Judge Dredd, and then in '86 was Warhammer 2300 AD and GURPS, and '87 was Ars Magica. So again, there's a real thread of, and I think it was the '80s, right? That the darkness and the bleakness of that decade sort of crashed into the neon lights and all the glitz and glamour, and we got things like Watchmen that sort of used one to interrogate the other.
Reading again, I was very much struck about how dense and rich it actually is. For those people who don't, who haven't experienced Watchmen, there must be people out there. Can you give us a quick potted summary of what the story, if you can?
Sure. Well, well, it's basically a detective story, and it's set in an alternate history mid '80s, where there were superheroes, sort of from about 1938 onwards, but only one of them has actual superpowers. The rest of them were just costumed vigilantes. John Osterman, aka Dr. Manhattan, was created in a nuclear experiment, and he has control over matter at a fundamental level, and he basically becomes America's strategic superpower weapon. So America dominates the world. Nixon has been president since 1971. Watergate never happened. And the world is just a grim and bleak place. But it opens with the murder of a government-sanctioned superhero, one of the few remaining, the comedian. And one of his former colleagues, the infamous Rorschach, sets about investigating because he thinks that somebody's out there killing all of the former masked heroes. So he sets off to warn Dr. Manhattan, his former partner, Night Owl, Dan Dryberg, and the Silk Spectre, Sally Jupiter? I can't pronounce the Polish name. And as they begin investigating, they discover a large conspiracy that leads them to shocking and world-changing revelations. But I think really it's a story about, and there's various accounts about what sort of person will become a superhero. And the answer in short is, I guess, a crazy person. And what sort of a world they would make, and what the sort of impact that people like that can have on the world and society around them. And there's, are we going to give away the ending? Let's not give away the ending. But I think it's also about people's beliefs in how they shape their destinies, and even the villain at the end who believes he's done everything for the right reasons to help humanity, having caused a terrible calamity. Even he at the end turns around to a higher power and says, well, I did the right thing, didn't I? It all turned out okay in the end, to which Dr. Manhattan says, well, nothing ever ends. So even then, even the greatest among us still have feet of clay. And I think there's good stuff we can get out of that for writing fiction and also writing and running games.
Absolutely. That was a great summary of it. And it has to be said that the way that it's composed, the artistry of how the frames are constructed, I think that's the bit that strikes you again when rereading it. The way that it's composed is just fantastic, isn't it?
It's very dense. It really, really does reward multiple readings. Famously, it uses a 9-panel grid on every page, and that was because they wanted to. Gibbons and Moore wanted it to look distinct. They wanted any page to be recognisably a page from Watchmen. And Alan Moore was of the opinion that basically all superhero characters, if you took off their hair, they would all look the same. They were all drawn in the same way. So there was great care taken to make sure that all the characters looked very, very different. Gibbons used apparently a stiff pen to draw them rather than having a line to give them different line weights and thicknesses. So the book has a really distinctive look, and he makes great use of structure. The cover is always in the first panel of the book. Issue 5 is perfectly symmetrical. The opening spread is symmetrical. If you fold back through the pages, you'll see the first page echoes the last page, and so on all the way through. But packed into all of that is a huge amount of visual detail, and a lot of recurring visual motifs, like the famous blood splodge on the comedian's badge that reappears throughout. And I mean, I first noticed it. There's the psychologist who's talking to Rorschach. A drop of ink falls out of his fountain pen. It forms that shape, and that shape recurs. There's the smiling face reoccurs. The little plugs on the spark hydrants, if you look at them upside down, they are the smiley face. And again, it creates a visual consistency. But I think they're all good little techniques that we can use in games to really reinforce a mood or a part of the world.
And before we get onto the gaming, I wanted to mention as well that it's interspersed, isn't it, by what could be described as handouts of articles that
yes.
give further depth to the world and give you a little hint of how this alternate universe works.
Yeah, they're quite brilliant. There's extracts from biographies of retired heroes. One of the characters, Night Owl, who's kind of like Batman. And they're all based on characters from Charlton Comics, which had gone out of business, I think, in 84 or 85. But he was very interested in birds. And so there's a section apparently from a textbook on ornithology talking about owls and how they act and respond. And that directly parallels the way he acts and responds. There's a whole separate story, the Tales of the Black Galleon. It's a pirate horror comic. And the character, the story there, is a direct mirror for one of the other characters going through the story as well, and the things that they do to get through the situations they find themselves in. Really, really clever stuff, and it's a way of adding depth without, I guess, having characters just deliver massive exposition dumps.
Absolutely.
It was, apparently, it's driven by the fact that they're having a hard time selling ads, so they had extra pages to fill.
Is that so? Well, there you go. That's a great nugget. And we mentioned gaming, and it'd be interesting to know about your experience of playing superhero games and what kind of influence Watchmen has had on your gaming.
Well, the first big campaign I ever ran was Champions, and I can remember seeing an ad for Champions first edition in Dragon magazine, and I was not particularly a comic book reader at the time, but I just loved the idea of punching people through walls and making presence attacks and all the crazy stuff that went with it. So I duly picked up a copy of Champions and ran a game that it ran for, I think, the last 2 years I was in high school, and then I went to America for a year, and the lads still at home in Oz kept it going, and it was running when I got back. And it was just a great fun game. I think the influence of Watchmen on that was just to make the storylines a bit darker. Champions is a really 4-color game. It's very much cast in that vein, but we saw a lot of superhero games started to turn as well. But some of the better stuff for DC drew on the different moods that they were that Watchmen was communicating. I think Vertigo comics had started then, and again we're getting those different influences. So by the time I'd really begun to appreciate Watchmen, I think my superhero gaming days were largely over. But I think for anybody who's running a superhero game, there's a lot you can pull from it in terms of just constructing your characters and having characters and their powers and costumes and attitudes and alliances and rivalries, reflecting who they are and helping you to tell the story.
Yeah, and rereading it for the purposes of this, I'd forgotten how much of that early part is driven by the investigation. Very much so. I mean, it loses its way a little bit, that drive, doesn't it? As more and more things start to weave into it. But it for an investigation game, this is some great little moments and great things that you could use as clues as well, and set pieces.
Who was at the funeral? That's always a good source of leads. And just the whole notion of one seemingly innocuous event that the police don't want to investigate because there's a lot of other crimes, and then one interested person picks it up and gradually unpicks it. The villain actually tips his hand quite early if you've got an eye for it. But all the characters fall for his ruse. But even calling him a villain is not entirely fair, and I think that notion of every character can be a villain, can be a hero. I mean, Rorschach, the Rorschach inkblot mask is on one hand, a fearless defender of the truth who refuses to compromise in the face of mind-bending horrors and evil. On the other hand, he's a psychotic vigilante who, who does terrible, unspeakable things. And I think those are all good things that you can weave into, particularly a superhero game, to get the mood to fit the story you're telling.
Yeah. And I like the idea as well of bringing characters out of retirement. So you could get your old Champions characters from the 80s and circle them up again.
Well, gosh, if we have the character sheet. So I do remember I got a letter when I was in America from one of the lads who played Marauder. He was sort of a power suit guy. And he said, here's my character sheet. I can't tell you how I made him. The calculations are all too complicated, which is Champions in a nutshell, really. But I think it's a really clever game that it cuts back, talking about bringing characters out of retirement, it cuts back and forward in time. So we see some of the characters who are now retired or deceased in their prime and making the decisions that have a big influence on current events. And I think, again, for an investigative scenario, not just bringing characters out of retirement, but finding old diaries, talking to former colleagues, finding out the truth about things that really happened. And there's a central truth about one of the characters that is, again, hinted at and is only revealed towards the end that makes, when it's revealed, it makes a great deal of sense of a lot of other things that have been in the story. So delving into the past and bringing it forward however you can, I think can be a really, really effective and probably, well, certainly in my game, something I don't do enough. I don't know. Maybe you do it heaps in yours.
Not particularly, no. I find I'd forgotten as well what a great character Dr. Manhattan is. He has great qualities, and his first appearance, even in a comic book, it's quite awe-inspiring, isn't it? When you realise what a significant character he is and influence on the world.
Yeah, he's also a really good example of how he's neutralized in part. It's a bit like a classic DC. DC superheroes and villains tend to be much more powerful than Marvel ones, and that's why the great DC villains are guys like Lex Luthor, no superpowers, but they outthink or they outfox their opponents, and that's exactly what happens to the plot to neutralize Dr. Manhattan is not to punch him through a wall; it's to make him decide to not intervene. And it's very, very it's not a bad plan, and it nearly works. It nearly works, except one of the in the game terms, one of the player characters talks him out of it, which would be a great situation to put a player in where the one person who can help save the day couldn't be bothered, and how do you convince them to take an interest in what's going on? Great fodder and great scene setting. But I think the other thing for games is that it really highlights to me the value of preparation and detail, all that richness that we were talking about earlier, and how absorbing it makes it. I think there's a lot of I'll get up on my soapbox just for a moment. There's a lot of the flavour in RPGs tends to be very, very light, very, very light preparation and improv, and just go with it, let your players help you tell the story, and that's great. And I think most of us know how to do that. But I think reading Watchmen, it really drove home to me just the value you can get from deep preparation and a really deep understanding of your material. And that doesn't mean clobbering your players with reams of exposition, but it's like a musician improvising. You have to know how to play your instrument really well before you can improvise well. And I think the lesson for gamers is that if you know your system well and if you know your setting well, then that makes it easy for you to have those light preparation improvised sessions, because you've got a very deep well of material that you're drawing on.
Oh, that's a good soapbox to be on, because I must admit that I belong to the thing of light prep and just thinking on your feet. But I always respect and enjoy people who put that level of depth into it, because you always think that there's something more to discover.
Well, it's like it gives you more notes to play, more colours to paint with. If you've if you really know a game in a setting well, then it becomes a lot easier, and the games, you makes it easier to improvise it from the start. And I think it also gives you a chance, in that balancing game between telling a story and letting the players have their head. The trick is to have a story emerge out of letting the players have their head, and if you can drop in those subtle recurring motifs and deep motivations for characters, and I think that makes it a lot easier for those sorts of things and those storylines and those great campaign moments to emerge, because then the players will look back and say, oh, that's what that thing was all about, or using motifs to help create different moods as you go through different stages of your campaign, I think can be really, really effective.
Yeah, very much so. Let's talk about system in terms of superhero system. You mentioned champion. What kind of system would you go for a Watchmen type campaign?
Yeah, I wouldn't use champions. I know there's some people who disagree with me violently on this, but I think it is exactly the wrong kind of system for superheroes, because it's very detailed, turn by turn tracking your movement rates and endurance and expenditures. I don't think that's what you want. I played an advanced Marvel superheroes game for about a year when I was in America. That was a really good system because it was light and flexible. I think Savage Worlds would probably be my pick today. And I haven't looked at some of the dedicated systems like Mutants and Masterminds. I ran some Villains and Vigilantes. That was a really good system. Probably a bit dated now, but I'd probably plump for I think Savage would be the way to go. Because I think you want something that's fast and fluid.
Yeah. And so do you think that's what it would bring to a scenario such as Watchmen, a world such as Watchmen?
Well, I think it would let you really concentrate on the story. It's Watchmen is not a story about punching people through brick walls. I don't think does anybody get punched through a brick wall? I can't remember. But it's not really a story about, because part of the point of the story is that superpowers can't solve the world, can't save the world. They can't solve all the problems, because the problems come from people being people, even if they're, can control matter at a subatomic level. So I think a system that gets out of the way, and I think Savage has enough crunch so you can have fun powers that do specific things, and you can have each character nicely differentiated in that way. And I think Savage handles investigations fairly well. So you just want something unobtrusive, because I think the focus for me, a Watchmen-inspired story would be one that really focused on characters and interactions with each other, and how they are shaping the world and how the world is shaping them.
Yeah, I think with edges and hindrances, it give you some of those vulnerabilities, wouldn't it, as well, built into some of the characters, definitely. Yeah,
and I guess it was in the 80s that we started to see games like Champions and Hero System games and GURPS, and even earlier, I know, even TFT and various other games had that idea of having advantages and disadvantages and flaws and hindrances. But it's a great way to build a character, and it's especially appropriate for superheroes. And it's not just I'm weak to kryptonite, or the ring doesn't affect things that are yellow. Psychological disadvantages are much better, and that's kind of how again those really powerful villains can bring really powerful heroes low, because they understand what makes them tick. And it provides weaknesses to beat the villains too. There's the Superman storyline where Lex Luthor hires an investigator who comes back to him and says, Clark Kent is Superman. And Luthor just refuses to believe him, flat out. Couldn't be. Because if you had that power, why would you hang around pretending to be a lowly reporter? So, and for characters, it's tremendously satisfying to, I think, discover a villain's sort of psychological weakness and turn it against them. That's a real great role-playing achievement if you can bring it off in a game.
Yeah, that's so true. So, Watchmen, Michael, is it last final pitch? Is there anything else that you wanted to add to encourage people to go out there and discover it or rediscover Watchmen?
Oh gosh, let me have a think. I think, well, just in terms of the gaming side, I think put the characters at the forefront and you really think about who your characters are and why they're doing what they're doing, and even if a character is a broad stereotype, it's good to personalize and make them a real individual. But I think in terms of just getting involved with the source material, it's kind of a foundational text of a lot of what followed. The movie, controversial. Some people didn't like it. I quite enjoyed it. I liked seeing it on screen. I think Zack Snyder did a workmanlike job with it, and I watch it periodically, and I really, really enjoy it. And I think if you don't want to sit down and read the book, watch the movie. I enjoyed it, but just read the book. Just read it. You won't regret it. If you don't like it, you can hit me up on the Discord and tell me why. But it is definitely one to reread. So if you read it back in the day, jump in again, and I guarantee you'll be floored by just what a masterpiece it is.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll get me coat.
Welcome to the end of the podcast. This is the bit where we're heading towards the door. We've got our coats on. We won't feel the benefit. It's starting getting cold out there now. But nevertheless, we're still doing a bit of closing time chatter about the things that are occupying our thoughts at the moment. Blythe, what's occupying your thoughts at the moment?
Well, a game I recently acquired and recently played that intrigued me for a while is the game Kult, the horror role-playing game Kult.
When did that come out? Is that a 90s game?
It's an 90s game, yeah. And it's very controversial because it's horror, but it has all these kind of warnings attached to it about sexual stuff and stuff like that kind of a bit off-putting. You part of me thinks, really, do I want all that? It's hard work. The new one, which is based around, it's a powered by the apocalypse type revamp of it. And it's the one that I recently purchased and played at Owlbear for the first time. So I've had an experience of it. And
I must admit, from that pitch that you just given, having the sexy stuff in, it puts me off. You're going to have to do more work to kind of appeal to me. Go on. What's it got that is going to make me want to play?
Well, it's a bit like the idea behind it. I didn't really know anything about it. When I signed up to play it at Albert, I just thought, oh, yeah, that sounds good. Person running it, run games before, very good. So I thought, yeah, that's a winner, that one. But I suppose it's a bit like Hellraiser meets The Matrix. So the idea behind it is it's kind of modern day. People probably writing again and say I'm wrong, but the very basic idea of it is that people were once kind of divine beings, and you've been tricked into this illusory world. The world's kind of an illusion. There are these kind of weird angels and demonic kind of characters that are propping up this illusion, and your characters are people who started to see through it. That's the very basic gist. There is a lot more setting to it, and I haven't read all the settings, so I'm not purporting to be some kind of expert. No, I never purport to be an expert on role playing, but I've not read it all. So there's quite a bit of detail. I'd quite fancy running some, but I don't think I'd run it till next year. I need to really have some time to get my head around it. And it does have these. I suppose it's like anything. It's like it's kind of dialable in that you can dial up the unpleasant stuff in it, but you can also dial it down a bit. So the game we played at Albert, there was horror in it. There was a bit of player versus player, and it was quite good fun. There was horror in it, grisly murder scene, all those kind of things, but it didn't have, no children got hurt, and there was nothing sexual in it, nothing like that. But some of the scenarios do go into those areas, and I know what you mean. I look at them and think, not sure. You have to be very careful if you wanted to introduce some of those things in it. There's one thing it does, for example, one thing it does, I've got some of the free scenarios, and one thing it does is it gives characters sort of backgrounds that are quite traumatic, and then that part of horror is that those backgrounds are exploited, and therefore, something like a suicide in your family history is then exploited in the horror. That's one of the concepts that goes on in the game. And of course, you realise that would be quite a tricky thing, wouldn't it? Particularly at a convention to run. You know, you'd have to be careful that you just pitch it right, I suppose. But it's quite an interesting game. It's kind of based on Gnosticism as well.
Oh yeah.
The person running the game, Sue Savage, gave me I've had a bit of a chat with her afterwards, and I said it's powered by the apocalypse, but it uses 2d10 rather than 2d6. And I said that seems like a weird thing to do, but she said that it's based on Gnosticism, and the number 10 is like a kind of significant number.
Course,
so they've gone for that. And I spent some of Elba afterwards reading up on Gnosticism, and it's kind of like early Christian stuff, like weird kind of cult stuff that cult has in
stuff.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting. The setting is interesting.
Yeah. No, I think Gnostic, Hellraiser meets Matrix. I'm 60% there. I was 10% at the start. I'm 60% there. You have to do some more work, I think, but it sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it's something I think I'm going to give it a bit more, read a bit more, and then at some point maybe next year might try and run some, because it was good fun. It was great out, but it was good fun. It got all quite grisly and horrific. I won't go into details because she may run it again somewhere and spoil things, but it was a lot of fun actually.
The thing I was going to close on was, I think it related to something that you just said about background. You know, we're at that point of the year, and for some reason we follow the new term approach. New term and new games are coming up, aren't they? Because some have finished over summer, and we started new things, and we started Pirates of Drenix, and we're about to start a big Conan campaign, which I'm very much looking forward to. Both of those systems use background for characters to build up the characters. And Sam Vale, who's playing with us on Conan, has asked a question: how much background do you want? Shall I read what he said? And then we can have a discussion. All right.
Go.
All right. How much background bobbins do we need for our characters in the way of interlinked history and whatnot? I know some games masters prefer a sentence or two, others a fully realised family history. I strongly suspect Dirk to be in the first camp! ! I would like to try and get a little more character interaction role-playing into the game, though. Speeding from scene to scene is great, but sometimes having a breather is great too. So it made me wonder where is it that the role-playing is? So increasingly we're seeing, aren't we, that the role-playing seems to be in the background of characters, that somehow calling back and drawing out aspects of the character background is where role-playing inhabits. But I'm not sure it always is it?
No, it's always a tricky thing, isn't it, the background? Because these days, I think a long time ago I wouldn't have agreed with this, but these days I quite like the idea of developing your background as you play, maybe in the first few sessions. So you have a vague idea of your background, but you can also develop that as you play. You know, mixture of the two. I think that sometimes I've come up with a character background that's quite detailed, and then as the campaign's progressed, I've kind of fallen out in love with the character a bit because the background's not, in the end, not quite what I wanted or quite fit with the campaign. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I
quite like the idea of it develops as the first few sessions. You can kind of develop your character. Your character might do something in one of the early sessions, and you might go, right, okay, they've done this. I'm going to build that into their background in a way. It's quite a good way of doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes because there is a lot of effort front loading background stuff, when you hit the table, very often it has no relevance. It's like the Pirates of Drenix one, isn't it? It was very detailed, and I enjoyed it, and it did establish some relationships with the different characters. But when we played that first session, it didn't really come into play, did it? We kind of bounced off each other because we all had roles within the ship. Yeah. And it's those roles within the ship that determined our relationship with each other more than what we'd established up front.
And also what I deliberately did with Pirates of Drenix is in Traveller, you can have ally. As part of character creation, you get contact and allies, don't you? And what I said to you is, whilst when you got an enemy, I've come up with an enemy, because that seems fair, that I would come up with the enemy. But when you've had allies and contacts, what I've said is you can hold those allies and contacts as unnamed allies and contacts and then play them in the game. So if you go to a planet and you've got a spare ally slot, you can say, right, I'm going to have an ally here. I know someone here. And that is a way of developing a bit of your background in play, so to speak. And I kind of did that deliberately because I think it's a better way of doing it than deciding on an ally in character creation, coming up with some NPC in character creation that ultimately might be of no interest or no use during the game. Whereas I think you've all got one or two ally slots that you can play, like almost like a card. You can go, right, okay, we're going to such a planet. I've got an ally who works in the starport, that kind of thing. And once you've used it, but that kind of thing is a way of developing character background during the game.
Yeah. I think as well that character can emerge from action as well. And I think that is the spirit of Conan, even though it goes to great length in doing your background and where you've come from and how you've got the skills that you have and your life path and that kind of thing. Really, it is, it says in the GM advice that it is, action to action. And that's where the role playing emerges from, how you respond to events happening around you. So I hope I don't disappoint, Sam, but there isn't going to be much time for a breather in this campaign. But I might put some earlier adventures before we go headlong into the ultimate campaign, The Shadow of the Sorcerer, which is the pre-written campaign that I'm doing from Modifius. The best thing about this, though, it is in a breakneck pace. It does really pace a campaign. Goes all across the world as, high adventure wherever you turn. But the best thing about it, for me, is that it's justified the fact that over lockdown I bought all those splat books because it encourages you to get to the background of the different books. And you think, oh, I've got that one. Oh, yes. It was
mad lockdown purchases.
Yeah.
You've all done it.
Conan the Adventurer. I have that one. I feel like I've justified paying for it. Yeah.
Well, I feel like that with Pirates of Drenax because I've got lots to travel about. I've got the Companion, I've got the Aliens of Charted Space, I've got the High Guard, I've got the catalogue and all that. And that's a bit like that. Although you don't need those extra books to play the campaign, there is the odd spaceship or thing dropped in the campaign where you go, you do need the Aliens of Charted Space Volume 2 for this. I have that. It's been justified, all this money.
Good. We've got loads of exciting stuff coming up, haven't we, over the next few months after the summer lull. So I'm looking forward to that. See you later, Blythe.
See ya.
Excuse my round.
Thanks to Christian and Michael for their contribution to this episode. I really enjoyed putting this together as I think Savage Worlds is my current go-to system and our Wednesday group is stronger than ever. We've just completed a great Strontium Dog 2000 AD prog devised by Daily Dwarf. He's taken it to Grogmeet, which is at Manchester and online this year at the weekend of the 11th of November 2022. There's a loose theme of Progmeet with games, scenarios and characters based on ideas from progressive rock and in some cases the progs of 2000 AD. I'm going for Titan Effect inspired by The Sentinel, an album by Scottish group Palace. Search and terminate. We have read your mind. You are an enemy of the state. If you want to find out more about the virtual Grogmeet that's running at the same time as the face-to-face one, then follow the page over at thegrognardfiles.com. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you've heard, then write a review. We really do respond to the feedback. We took it really seriously, the comment about recording in the pub, and it'll help us determine the content and approach in the future. Please pass it on if you enjoy it, or if you're able to, throw some coins in the Patreon tip jar. I'm off for a hot toddy and a lie down. Until next time, adios amigos.